Between 1968 and 1969, a series of murders in Northern California were linked by letters signed Zodiac. The killer targeted couples, taunted police, and sent ciphers to newspapers. Despite extensive investigation, his identity remains unknown. This documentary presents the official timeline, evidence, and confirmed facts. The Zodiac case unfolded in Northern California during the late 1960s. Most of the known attacks happened in the San Francisco Bay Area and nearby counties. The first shootings were in Solano County. Later crimes stretched into Napa County and the city of San Francisco itself. At that time, California was changing quickly. The Bay Area had seen a surge of new residents after World War II. San Francisco was known for its culture, tourism, and business. It was also the center of the counterculture movement. Large numbers of young people lived there, drawn by music, politics, and social change. But crime was also rising. The late 1960s saw an increase in murders across California. Police departments had limited technology for solving violent crimes. DNA testing did not exist. Computers were not widely used. Much of the work depended on fingerprints, ballistics, and eyewitness reports. Another challenge was jurisdiction. Each county had its own sheriff's office or police department. Vallejo Police, Napa County deputies, and the San Francisco Police Department all became involved in Zodiac cases. The California Highway Patrol and FBI also joined later. Coordination was often slow. There were no centralized databases to quickly compare evidence. Communication with the public relied on newspapers and television. When the Zodiac began sending letters, newspapers became the key link between the killer and the community. The San Francisco Chronicle, the Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald all received direct messages. This gave the case immediate attention but also spread fear. The Zodiac chose areas that were easy to access but often quiet and isolated. Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs Park, and Lake Berryessa were semi-rural. These locations were popular with young couples looking for privacy. Presidio Heights in San Francisco was different. It was an urban neighborhood with many homes nearby. That attack shocked residents who had not expected violence in such a busy area. The police in each area faced public pressure to respond quickly. Yet resources were limited. Detectives in Vallejo worked with only a small staff. Napa County sheriffs covered a wide rural territory. San Francisco police had more manpower, but their caseload was already heavy. The FBI became involved after the first letters were sent. Because the mail crossed county lines, the federal government had authority. The Bureau provided cryptography experts and handled some of the evidence. But the Zodiac was never caught, showing the limits of law enforcement tools of that era. Another part of the setting was media culture. True crime reporting was already common in newspapers, but the Zodiac's letters created a new situation. Reporters were not just covering a case. They were also handling direct communications from the suspect. Editors debated whether to print the killer's letters. Police worried about copycats. In the end, the letters were published, and the case became headline news across the country. The late 1960s context matters because it shaped both the crimes and the investigation. California was growing fast, crime rates were climbing, and police methods were limited. Multiple agencies tried to work together but faced challenges. The Zodiac took advantage of this system, sending letters, moving between counties, and using fear to gain attention. This is the environment in which the Zodiac case began. First confirmed attack, Lake Herman Road. The Zodiac's first confirmed attack happened on December 1968. The location was Lake Herman Road, a quiet stretch between Vallejo and Berryessa in Solano County, California. That night, two teenagers drove there to spend time together. David Faraday was 17. He was a student at Vallejo High School. Betty Lou Jensen was 16. She attended Hogan High School. They had gone to A school event earlier in the evening and later drove David's mother's Rambler station wagon to the area. Lake Herman Road was known as a place where young couples parked. The spot was rural, dark, and outside the city. It was also used by hunters and residents driving between towns. At around 11 o'clock p.m., a local man named James Owen drove past the area. He told police he saw 2 cars parked on the turnout. He later recalled hearing what might have been a gunshot, but he was not sure. Minutes later, another driver passed by. The scene had changed. Faraday and Jensen were no longer in the car. Their bodies were discovered shortly after. Police arrived and documented the crime scene. David Faraday had been shot once in the head at close range. His body was found near the rear wheel of the car. Betty Lou Jensen had tried to run. She was found lying about 30 feet from the vehicle. She had been shot 5 times in the back. Ballistics confirmed the use of a .22 caliber weapon. Investigators recovered shell casings around the scene. The ammunition was identified as Winchester Western Super X. No suspects were identified that night. Detectives interviewed local residents, hunters, and other drivers. Witnesses described seeing cars in the area earlier, but accounts varied. Some mentioned a white Chevrolet, others reported different vehicles. None could be tied directly to the crime. Both families were devastated. Newspapers covered the murders as a shocking double killing in a small community. The Vallejo Times-Herald reported the story on the front page the next day. At that time, no one connected the shooting to a serial offender. The case remained unsolved for months. Investigators continued to run ballistics tests and background checks. They could not establish a motive. Robbery was ruled out because money and personal belongings were left behind. Sexual assault was also ruled out. The Lake Herman Road murders became the foundation of the Zodiac case only. Later, at first, they stood alone as an unexplained double homicide. The connection would be made when later letters claimed responsibility. Official records confirmed this was the Zodiac's first recognized attack. The details: teenage victims, remote location, firearm use set the pattern that followed. It was a calculated assault on a vulnerable couple in an isolated spot. The Lake Herman Road killings remain one of the key events in the Zodiac timeline. They marked the start of a series that spread fear across Northern California and challenged police for years. Blue Rock Springs attack on July 4, 1969. Less than 7 months after the Lake Herman Road murders, another attack occurred in Vallejo. The location was Blue Rock Springs Park, a known spot for couples to park late at night. The victims were Darlene Farron and Michael Majot. Darlene was 22 years old. She was married, worked as a waitress, and was described by friends as outgoing and popular. Michael was 19, a laborer and a friend of hers. That evening, Darlene and Michael drove to the park around midnight in Darlene's brown Corvair. They parked in a lot where other cars sometimes stopped. A second vehicle pulled in behind them around that time. At first, Michael thought it was a police officer. The car drove off, but minutes later it returned. A man stepped out holding a flashlight and a handgun. Without saying a word, he shined the light into the car and began shooting. Michael was hit first. He slumped against the seat, seriously wounded. Darlene was struck multiple times. The attacker started to walk away but then returned. He fired several more rounds at the victims before leaving for good. In total, 5 shots struck Michael and 9 struck Darlene. Despite his injuries, Michael survived. Darlene was pronounced dead at Kaiser Hospital shortly after arrival. Ballistics confirmed the weapon was a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. Shell casings found at the scene matched Winchester Western ammunition, the same brand used in the Lake Herman Road killings. Less than an hour after the shooting, Vallejo police received a phone call. The caller's voice was described as calm and deliberate. He claimed responsibility for the Blue Rock Springs attack and also for the Lake Herman Road murders. The call was traced to a payphone near the Vallejo Police Department. This was the first direct contact between the killer and the police. The voice was not recorded, but dispatchers and officers present remembered the exact words. He said, "I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 miles on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year." Michael Muggeau later gave police a description of the shooter. He said the man was white, in his late 20s to early 30s, with short light brown hair. He described him as heavyset, about 5'8" tall. This description became the first eyewitness account of the Zodiac. The attack confirmed a pattern, like Lake Herman Road. It involved a young couple, a car, and a secluded location. Unlike the first case, this one produced a surviving witness and a phone call from the killer. The call linked the two crimes and marked the beginning of the Zodiac's direct communication with police. Darlene's funeral drew large crowds. She was well known in Vallejo, and her murder shocked the community. Michael remained hospitalized for weeks but eventually recovered. His account of the attack became a central part of the investigation. The Blue Rock Springs shooting solidified the case as the work of a single offender. Ballistics, witness testimony, and the killer's call tied it back to Lake Herman Road. It also marked the start of the Zodiac's public identity. He was no longer just an unknown gunman. He was now a figure who reached out to police, claimed responsibility, and inserted himself into the story. This event set the stage for the letters that followed, which would give the killer his lasting name. First letters and ciphers on July 31, 1969, less than a month after the Blue Rock Springs attack. 3 nearly identical letters arrived at 3 Bay Area newspapers. One went to the San Francisco Chronicle, another to the San Francisco Examiner, the third to the Vallejo Times-Herald. Each letter was handwritten on lined paper. Each opened with the same words, "This is the Zodiac speaking." It was the first time the name appeared. From that moment, investigators and the public began calling him the Zodiac. The letters claimed responsibility for both the Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs shootings. Each letter included details that had not been released in the press, such as the brand of ammunition used and the number of shots fired. These details confirmed the letters were authentic. Inside each envelope was 1/3 of a cipher. Together they formed what became known as the 408 symbol cipher. The killer demanded that each newspaper print its section on the front page or more murders would occur. The newspapers consulted with police before publishing. Law enforcement agencies debated the risk of encouraging the killer. In the end, editors decided to run the ciphers. On August 1, the Vallejo Times-Herald printed its section. The Chronicle and Examiner published theirs the next day. The public immediately began trying to solve the code. Hundreds of amateur cryptographers sent in attempts. Within a week, the cipher was broken by Donald Hardin, a schoolteacher from Salinas, and his wife Betty. They worked on it over a weekend and sent the solution to the Chronicle and to the police. The solved text did not reveal a name. Instead, it contained statements about enjoying killing and comparing it to hunting. The message ended with the most dangerous animal of all. Some characters remained garbled, likely due to errors in the cipher itself. The Hardin solution was confirmed by the FBI as accurate. The Bureau noted that the message matched the style and spelling of the letters. Police hoped the cipher would include the killer's identity, as he had suggested in his notes. Instead, it offered only disturbing sentences and no usable leads. Still, the ciphers established the Zodiac style, taunting, cryptic, and meant for maximum public impact. On August 4, 1969, a new letter arrived at the San Francisco Examiner. It began with "This is the Zodiac speaking," reinforcing the new identity. In this letter, the killer gave more details about the Blue Rock Springs attack, including the type of car driven by the victims and the clothing they wore. The August 4 letter removed any doubts. Investigators agreed they were dealing with the same offender across both shootings and that he intended to continue communicating. The letters also introduced new challenges for police. Not only did they have a violent suspect, but he was also shaping his own public image. Each communication forced detectives to balance the need for transparency with the risk of encouraging more crimes. The letters and the solved cipher brought the case out of local coverage and into national news. Reporters across the United States wrote about the cipher killer and his threats. The public now followed each development closely. The Zodiac had created a new kind of criminal identity, one that lived not only in crime scenes but also in headlines and puzzles. Lake Berryessa attack on September 27, 1969, the Zodiac attacked again. This time the location was Lake Berryessa in Napa County, about 30 miles north of Vallejo. The setting was different from the earlier shootings. It was broad daylight in a public recreation area near the water. The victims were Brian Hartnell, age 20, and Cecilia Shepard, age 22. They were both students. That afternoon, they drove to the lake to relax and have a picnic. They sat on a blanket in a secluded spot, talking and reading. In the late afternoon, they noticed a man walking toward them from a distance. At first, they thought he might be a fisherman or a park ranger. As he came closer, they saw he wore an unusual outfit. The man had on a dark hood with holes cut for his eyes. On the chest of the hooded figure was a white cross circle symbol, the same emblem seen in the letters. The man carried a gun and a length of rope. He told the couple he was an escaped convict from Montana and needed their car and money to get to Mexico. He said he had already killed a guard and stolen the weapon. Brian tried to reason with him, but the man forced both victims to lie on the ground. He tied their wrists and ankles with the rope. Then, without warning, he pulled out a knife and began stabbing them. Brian was stabbed 6 times in the back. Cecilia was stabbed 10 times in the back and abdomen. After the attack, the man walked back up the hill toward Brian's car. On the passenger door, he wrote a message in black marker. It contained the dates of the earlier shootings, the location, the cross-circle symbol, and the words Sep 27, 69, 6:30 by knife. Despite her injuries, Cecilia managed to untie Brian. A fisherman discovered them shortly after and called for help. Both victims were rushed to Queen of the Valley Hospital in Napa. Brian survived his wounds and later gave a detailed statement to police. Cecilia died 2 days later from her injuries. About an hour after the attack, a call came into the Napa Police Department. The caller reported the stabbing and directed officers to the victim's location. The voice was calm, just as in the earlier call to Vallejo police. Investigators traced the call to a payphone in downtown Napa, not far from the sheriff's office. For the first time, the Zodiac had attacked in daylight, in costume, and with a knife. This marked a shift in his methods. The writings on the car door and the phone call again linked him to the earlier crimes. Brian Hartnell's survival provided key details. He described the killer as a white male, stocky build, about 5'8" to 6'0" tall, with dark hair visible under the hood. Brian's testimony gave investigators their clearest account of the Zodiac's behavior during an attack. The Lake Berryessa case confirmed the killer's growing confidence. He introduced his symbol at the crime scene, expanded his methods, and continued direct communication with police. This attack became one of the most studied in the Zodiac timeline. It combined a personal encounter, survivor testimony, physical evidence, and the suspect's own written message. Together, they created one of the clearest but still unsolved episodes in the case. Presidio Heights murder on October 11, 1969, the Zodiac killed again. This time the crime took place in San Francisco in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. Unlike the earlier rural attacks, this was in a city street surrounded by homes. The victim was Paul Stein, a 29-year-old cab driver. That night, Stein picked up a fare in San Francisco's Theater District. The passenger asked to be taken to Washington and Maple Streets in Presidio Heights. At some point, the cab stopped 1 block short at Washington and Cherry Streets. At about 9:55 p.m., 3 teenagers in a nearby house saw the passenger shoot Stein in the head with a handgun. The passenger then leaned over the cab driver, apparently wiping down surfaces. They also saw him tearing a piece of Stein's shirt. The man then calmly walked away. The teenagers called the police immediately. A patrol unit was dispatched, but in the initial report, the suspect was mistakenly described as a black male. In fact, the witnesses had seen a white male, stocky build, about 5'8" to 6'0" tall, wearing glasses and dark clothing. Because of the error, officers who passed a man in the area did not stop him. Later reports suggest that may have been the Zodiac leaving the scene. When police arrived, they found Paul Stein dead in the front seat of his cab. His shirt was torn, as witnesses described. A portion of it was missing. The fare log confirmed he had picked up a passenger minutes before. Ballistics testing showed that Stein had been shot with a 9mm pistol. The shell casing matched the type used in the Blue Rock Springs attack. 2 days later, on October 13th, the San Francisco Chronicle received another letter. Enclosed was a square of Paul Stein's bloodstained shirt. This proved the letter was authentic and that the writer was the killer. The letter mocked police and threatened to target school buses. This murder changed the scope of the investigation. For the first time, the Zodiac had killed inside San Francisco itself, in a residential area, in front of witnesses. The case was no longer confined to suburban counties. Now the San Francisco Police Department led the investigation, working alongside Vallejo and Napa authorities. The Presidio Heights case gave investigators some of their best evidence. Eyewitness descriptions, physical items taken from the victim, and confirmed communication from the suspect. Composite sketches were made based on the teenager's account. The most well-known drawing of the Zodiac, showing a heavy-set man with glasses, came from this case. Despite this, the killer was not identified. No suspect matching the sketch was arrested. The shirt piece kept arriving in later letters, reinforcing his authorship. Paul Stein's murder was the last confirmed killing by the Zodiac. Later letters claimed additional victims, but no more deaths were officially linked. The Presidio Heights attack remains central to the Zodiac case. It connected the earlier shootings to San Francisco, produced a surviving visual description, and demonstrated the killer's ability to act in public with little fear of being caught. Continued letters and media interaction. 1969 to 1971. After the Presidio Heights murder, the Zodiac increased his written communication. From late 1969 through 1971, he sent multiple letters to Bay Area newspapers. These letters were verified by handwriting, content, and in some cases physical evidence. October 1969, school bus threats. In his October 13th letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, the Zodiac enclosed a piece of Paul Stein's shirt. He wrote about killing school children by shooting at bus tires and picking off children as they exited. The threat caused widespread alarm. Police began escorting school buses in San Francisco. On November 8, 1969, another letter arrived at the Chronicle. It included a 340 character cipher, later called the Z340. At the time, the cipher remained unsolved. Decades later, in 2020, it was cracked by a team of codebreakers, and the FBI confirmed the solution. The decoded text repeated the Zodiac's earlier themes of enjoying killing but did not reveal his identity. The next day, November 9th, the Zodiac mailed another letter. He mocked police for failing to catch him after the Presidio Heights crime. He claimed officers had passed him that night and not recognized him. This matched accounts that officers had stopped near the crime scene but did not detain a white male because of the mistaken broadcast. December 1969, letter to Melvin Belli. On December 20, 1969, a letter was sent to San Francisco attorney Melvin Belli. It again included a piece of Paul Stein's shirt. In it, the writer pleaded for help, saying he could not control himself. Police confirmed the letter was authentic. Belly held a televised appeal for the Zodiac to surrender, but no further contact came. 1970, ongoing communication in 1970, more letters followed. On April 20th, the Zodiac mailed a letter with a 13-character cipher. It came with a diagram for a bomb the writer claimed he would use against a school bus. The cipher has never been solved. On June 26, 1970, another letter arrived with a map of the San Francisco Bay Area. It included a cross-circle symbol centered near Mount Diablo. The Zodiac claimed the symbol and a set of instructions could pinpoint bomb locations. No bombs were ever found. On July 24, 1970, a letter again threatened to attack buses and included crude sketches of possible explosive devices. A week later, on July 26, another letter reached the Chronicle. It was longer, mocking police and boasting of crimes. It also included the phrase "This is the Zodiac speaking," which was used in nearly all communications. On October 27, 1970, the Chronicle received what became known as the Halloween card. The card contained drawings, the Zodiac symbol, and the words "Peekaboo, you are doomed." Handwriting experts confirmed it matched earlier Zodiac letters. 1971, fewer communications. In March 1971, the Los Angeles Times received a letter from someone claiming to be the Zodiac. It referenced the unsolved murder of Sherry Jo Bates, a student killed in Riverside in 1966. The FBI and Riverside police reviewed the claim. Later analysis found the connection uncertain, and the Bates case remains separate from the confirmed Zodiac series. By 1971, the volume of letters slowed. Law enforcement began to doubt some later notes. Forensic checks confirmed some were genuine, but others were considered hoaxes. Media role throughout this period, the San Francisco Chronicle became the main channel for Zodiac letters. The Examiner and Vallejo Times-Herald also received mail, but fewer. Each new letter was published, though editors sometimes debated whether printing them encouraged further crimes. The letters turned the Zodiac into a household name. Each one was covered in national press. His threats, codes, and mocking tone kept the story in headlines for years. Verified letter count. By the end of 1971, investigators had confirmed at least 21 communications as authentic Zodiac letters or cards. The consistency of handwriting, phrasing, and the use of the cross-circle symbol helped confirm them. The period between late 1969 and 1971 represents the height of the Zodiac's public activity. He killed at least 5 known victims, wounded 2, and sent dozens of pages of letters. The combination of crimes and direct communication made him unique in American criminal history. Investigation and task force work. As the Zodiac case grew, multiple law enforcement agencies became involved. The crimes stretched across Solano, Napa, and San Francisco counties. Each had its own police or sheriff's department. The California Highway Patrol and the FBI also joined. Coordination challenges. At the time, there was no central database for sharing evidence. Fingerprints, ballistics, and reports had to be exchanged by mail or telephone. Officers often worked with incomplete information. This made coordination difficult, especially when the Zodiac moved between jurisdictions. The Vallejo Police Department handled the first 2 shootings. Napa County Sheriff's Office took the Lake Berryessa case. The San Francisco Police Department investigated the Presidio Heights murder. Each department had different evidence, and communication was not always smooth. Task Force to improve coordination. A task force was created in 1969. Detectives from each department met to compare evidence. The FBI assisted with cryptography and communications analysis. The Bureau confirmed the authenticity of many letters. They also worked to trace envelopes and stamps, though forensic tools at the time were limited. Evidence collected. Ballistics tied several shootings together. Shell casings from Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs both came from Winchester Western Ammunition. A 9mm pistol was confirmed as the weapon in later cases. Fingerprints were lifted from Palestine's taxi. A partial bloody print was found on the cab's door, though it was incomplete, and could not be matched to any suspect. Handwriting analysis became a major tool. Experts compared the Zodiac's letters to samples from potential suspects. The cross-circle symbol and unusual phrasing helped confirm authenticity. Suspects over the years, hundreds of names were checked. One man, Arthur Lee Allen, became the most prominent suspect. Police searched his home in 1972 and again in 1991. He owned weapons, lived near Vallejo, and was identified by some witnesses as resembling the Zodiac sketch. However, fingerprints and handwriting tests did not match. DNA tests in the 2000s also excluded him. Other suspects were investigated but cleared. Some confessions and leads turned out to be hoaxes. Despite many interviews, no one was charged. Limitations of technology in the late 1960s and 1972 forensic science lacked many tools used today. DNA testing did not exist. Computers were not widely used in investigations. Profiling was limited. Detectives relied heavily on witness descriptions, handwriting, and ballistics. The Zodiac exploited these limits. He used payphones, wore disguises, and attacked in different counties. He wrote letters with personal details but avoided giving traceable information. Outcome: by the mid-1970s, the task force had followed hundreds of tips. Some evidence remained, but no case strong enough for prosecution. Investigators concluded that the Zodiac was careful, mobile, and aware of police methods. The case stayed open but momentum slowed. The task force marked one of the first large-scale multi-agency efforts against a serial killer in California. It showed both progress in cooperation and the weaknesses of the era's investigative system. Later correspondence and suspected cases after 1971, Zodiac's confirmed letters became less frequent. Some communications arrived in the years that followed, but not all were accepted as genuine. Handwriting experts and investigators judged authenticity by comparing phrasing, spelling errors, and the use of the cross-circle symbol. 1977's letters. Several letters continued into 1974. These included the so-called Exorcist letter, received by the San Francisco Chronicle in January 1974. It mocked the film The Exorcist and ended with the Zodiac symbol. Other short notes appeared later that year. Some experts consider them authentic. Others do not. By the mid-1970s, the flow of verified Zodiac communications stopped. After 1978, few letters were treated as reliable. Several were later labeled hoaxes, including one in 1978 that was initially publicized but then ruled out by handwriting analysis. Suspected Zodiac cases. During this period, investigators reviewed other unsolved crimes to see if they matched Zodiac's pattern. Kathleen Johns, 1970. A woman in Modesto reported being abducted by a man who offered her a ride after her car broke down. She escaped hours later. She later identified the man from the Zodiac sketch. Police considered the case suspicious but never confirmed Zodiac involvement. Donna Lass, 1970. A nurse disappeared from South Lake Tahoe in September 1970. A postcard sent to the Chronicle made references to her case. Authorities investigated but could not prove a Zodiac connection. Sherry Jo Bates, 1966. A college student murdered in Riverside years earlier was linked to anonymous letters. In 1971, Zodiac letters hinted at responsibility, but police in Riverside concluded their case were separate. The Bates murder remains unsolved but not officially counted as Zodiac-confirmed victims. Law enforcement today recognizes only 5 confirmed Zodiac murders. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, Lake Herman Road, 1968. Darlene Ferrin, Blue Rock Springs, 1969. Cecilia Shepard, Lake Berryessa, 1969. Paul Stein, Presidio Heights, 1969. Two survivors are also confirmed: Michael Mageau, Blue Rock Springs, Brian Hartnell, Lake Berryessa. Other possible victims remain unproven. Public memory. As time passed, the case remained in public discussion. Books, documentaries, and films kept interest alive. Some later letters and claims surfaced, but without strong evidence. Police continued to list only the original series was confirmed. By the 1980s and 1992, the case had shifted from active investigation to long-term cold case. Detectives reviewed it periodically but had no breakthroughs. Modern developments. 2000s. By the 2000s, the Zodiac case was decades old but still active in San Francisco's cold case unit. Modern forensic tools offered new chances to review the evidence. DNA testing. In 2002, San Francisco police announced they had tested saliva traces from Zodiac letters. A partial DNA profile was developed, but it was incomplete. The quality of the material was poor because of age and contamination. The profile was compared to samples from Arthur Lee Allen, the main suspect for many years. The result was negative. Police noted that Allen could not be confirmed as the Zodiac, but he also could not be completely excluded because the DNA was partial. Digital age and renewed interest. The rise of the Internet created a new wave of amateur research. Online forums collected documents, police reports, and photos. Many independent investigators proposed suspects, but none were confirmed by law enforcement. The San Francisco Police Department and FBI emphasized that the case remained open and unsolved. Cipher breakthrough. In December 2020, an international team of private codebreakers solved the 340-character cipher, the Z340, that had remained unsolved for over 50 years. The team included David Orenchak from the United States, Sam Blake from Australia, and Jaro van Eyck from Belgium. The solution was confirmed by the FBI. The message repeated Zodiac's earlier statements about enjoying killing and mocking police. It did not provide a name or direct clue to his identity. Casebreakers Group. In 2021, a private group of retired law enforcement and intelligence officers called the Casebreakers claimed to have identified a man named Gary Post as the Zodiac. They cited photographs and alleged forensic links. However, the FBI and San Francisco police quickly stated the case was still open and no official suspect had been confirmed. The Post claim remains unverified. Current status as of 2025, the Zodiac killer case remains unsolved. San Francisco police still listed as active. In their cold case files, the FBI confirms they continue to review information. DNA analysis has improved in recent years, raising hopes that new testing on preserved evidence could one day provide stronger results. The Zodiac's confirmed crimes remain limited to 5 murders and 2 surviving victims. More than 50 years later, investigators continue to treat his letters, ciphers, and threats as central evidence. The Zodiac killer case is one of the most studied unsolved crimes in American history. Between 1968 and 1969, 5 confirmed murders were committed in Northern California. 2 victims survived. Dozens of letters, ciphers, and threats were sent to newspapers and police. Despite decades of investigation, the killer's identity has never been proven. The confirmed victims were David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Stein. Survivors Michael Mageau and Brian Hartnell gave investigators the only eyewitness descriptions. These accounts, along with forensic evidence and the killer's own communications, created the official record of the case. Law enforcement at the time faced major challenges. Technology was limited, communication between counties was slow, and the Zodiac was careful to leave few direct traces. A task force was formed and the FBI assisted. But no arrest was made. Over the years, hundreds of suspects were investigated. The most notable, Arthur Lee Allen, was strongly suspected but never proven guilty. DNA testing later excluded him from the available samples. The letters and ciphers gave the case its lasting notoriety. The first 408 symbol cipher was solved quickly, but the 340 character cipher was not cracked until 2020, over 50 years later. The decoded message added little new information, but it showed the killer's ongoing intent to taunt authorities. Many other codes, notes, and claims surfaced, but only 21 communications are officially accepted as authentic. Later theories and alleged suspects have not been verified. Groups and private investigators have continued to search, but San Francisco police and the FBI maintain the case as open with no named suspect. Evidence such as fingerprints, partial DNA, and handwriting remains, but none has identified the killer. The Zodiac case stands today as an example of both the limits and persistence of criminal investigation. It demonstrates how a killer can exploit public fear, media coverage, and gaps in forensic science. It also shows the lasting impact of crime on victims, families, and communities. More than 50 years after the attacks, the Zodiac's crimes remain part of American culture. Books, films, and documentaries continue to explore the case. Online communities study every detail. Yet the facts remain the same: 5 people killed, 2 survivors, and a suspect who was never identified. The case is officially unsolved. What endures is a careful record of evidence, witness accounts, and official reports. Those documents tell the story as it truly happened, without speculation. They show how one individual created fear across a region and left behind a mystery that endures to this day.